This is a radio broadcast addressed from the League of Nations on the global warfare against the Morgana threat, where we report the recent happenings amongst the major nations contributing to the defense of our united front. I am your speaker, Ammaraglio Maus, but you may refer to me as Commissar, or simply the Speaker, whichever you or your government prefers. It's now week 3 of October, and tensions still ride high following the deafening silence of Poland's collapse. And seemingly, Morgana activity continues to escalate alongside these rising tensions, with some nations receiving more direct threats than others. But in a welcome turn of events, the nations of the world seem to be preparing to take the fight to the Morgana if they haven't already. Hopefully, this proves to mean more cooperation for our united front. First up, news regarding the League of Nations. Following the proceedings of last week's meeting, members of the League are yet to reconvene to discuss further possible war plans, and as such, no war plan was decided upon this week. Perhaps they are giving members time to collect themselves before restarting any proceedings, but time is not a luxury we can afford when dealing with the Morgana, dear listener. The longer we stand divided, the quicker we will fall. It's only if we stand united do we have a chance to defeat our foreign invaders. That statement still rings true in the hearts of some, but especially one individual. Continuing the actions from last week, the commander of the improvised multinational force that drove the Morgana from Rotterdam gambled it all. The multinational fleet was going to assault the Morgana not in the Skagerrak Strait, seeking assistance from the Allied German and Soviet forces near the region. With this combined force, humanity had a good chance of winning this battle. If they were to join together and succeed, the League of Nations would have proof that the world's navies could turn the tide in the war against the Morgana. But if the warring nations refused to help, the captain and everything the captain represented would likely die as a result. All we can do now is watch and wait, as it would all be decided in the days ahead. Along with that comes news from the Allies, more specifically of Polish vessels still afloat in the aftermath of their country's capitulation. Reports state that ORP Orzel slipped internment in Estonia on the 18th of October, using a clever ruse and a little sabotage. Rumors from the British Embassy in Moscow say that Orzel's bell appeared when her submarine grounded, and she personally heaved it off the sandbar to make their escape and continue their journey out of dangerous seas and towards safe harbor. Rumor has it that their planned destination is in the United Kingdom, more specifically Scotland. If true, their journey to Scotland would take at least 40 days if they were careful, and more importantly lucky. There could be no communications, no hints of progress, nothing that could lead to their discovery. All that remained for the crew was to hope. Hope for a better tomorrow. Following that, we head over to the Mediterranean to hear news from Italy, who remains as the top leading nation contributing to the war against the Morgana. This week, the Regia Marina finally achieved a measure of justice for La Spezia, after launching a daring raid through the war plan, the Palace of the Vanities, which found 88% support amongst captains. The Morgana Vanity, using materials harvested from Italian ports, had begun an elaborate engineering project in the Tyrrhenian Sea. A stunningly, inhumanely gorgeous palace of reflective surfaces and fine ground sand sculpted into fantastic shapes. It was a provocation that Italy could not allow. On the 14th of October, the battle fleet sortied from Toronto. As the sun rose on the 15th, they were caught at a disadvantage when the incomplete palace caught the light of the sun. Its brilliance was literally blinding and made it impossible to range the enemy. Only as distance and aspect changed were the Italians able to begin effective fire, and even that was only possible as the enemy had not raised steam at the beginning of the battle. Close action with the Vanities might have been catastrophic, but Italian armor was generally proof against the poor shell quality of the Morgana, and the battle ended with the remnants put to flight. The battle was noteworthy in that several variants of Vanity were present at the Palace of Glass. However, it was not without cost. Much of the battle fleet sustained moderate damage, and the navigatory-class destroyer Leone Pencaldo was sunk as she bravely attempted a torpedo run. It goes without saying that following this naval action, the Regia Marina will have some difficulty sortying in force in the coming months. Reports say the destruction of the palace took a day of shelling before the structure collapsed, and was unusually traumatic for the sailors involved. Perhaps it was because many of them had fought non-stop for weeks on very little sleep and on restricted diets, or perhaps it was that stress levels were high to begin with. But, whatever the reason, the destruction of a work of startling beauty, however monstrous its functions may be, proved devastating to morale. R.N. Raimondo Montecuccoli, who is credited for firing the final salvo that brought the palace down, had to be towed back to Naples as her crew broke down into tears or flung themselves into the sea. The situation was similar, albeit less extreme, on other ships, sources say. In response to the collapse, Vanity swore revenge. In fact, it was the first recorded case of any Morgana specifically declaring hostile intent against a human nation. Some of Italy's military command are proud of this fact. Others view this as an omen of hard times to come. Following that, we turn our attention towards the Pacific with the Empire of Japan, who is the second leading nation contributing to our united front. To say that the Admiralty of Japan was divided this week is an understatement. Members of the Imperial Japanese Navy were at odds in deciding what actions to take. Their latest discussion reportedly soon devolved into a heated argument when the proposal of a joint effort with the Imperial Japanese Army came up. Sources say before the heated argument could escalate further, the matter resolved itself when the Naval Chief of Staff entered the hall, stating he had a message of the highest order from the Emperor himself. The hall that was once filled with irritable and irate voices was now so quiet a pin drop could be heard. The Naval Chief of Staff then announced that the war plan where heaven meets the sea, regardless of previous support, was now set in stone as their new orders. Following Emperor Showa's request, the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Imperial Japanese Army cooperated with one another, and together took steps to prepare Tokyo and the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal for an unprecedented request. The Tenno was rumored to be planning for a meeting of the Arohitagami, and the ceremony could not be marred by the Morgana. The Prime Minister's new government was bolstered by this example of cooperation and accord, and the general readiness of the nation to face the current circumstances with courage and endurance was similarly affected. Meanwhile, the Funayuri were becoming more and more of a presence in the waters to the south, though, fortunately for Japan, their fury was more directed at the Philippines than at Japanese territory. Appeals for assistance from Manila were answered with sympathy, but no material support. There was only so much the Imperial Japanese Navy could organize on short notice, particularly since Governor General Kobayashi in Taihoku was filing increasingly desperate appeals for more naval support for Taiwan. Hopefully, the Imperial Japanese Navy can find the time to send support, as rumors of a Morgana plot in the region are beginning to materialize. After that, we head over to the United States, who is the third contributing nation in the defense against the Morgana threat. With Manila under siege and increasing reports of Morgana sightings around Guam, the United States Navy decided it was time to project its force further out into the Pacific, and the United States government agreed. The war plan, the bridge westward, was proposed and passed with an 87% majority in favor. Later that day, reports state that the United States Navy moved their fleets from San Jose to Honolulu so that they may better support actions in the Pacific. Very present in their calculations was this: Hawaii conferred significant advantages in logistic and supply as the fleet continued westward to relieve the Philippines. I spoke with an American captain before they departed to Hawaii, and they had one thing to say regarding possible counterattacks. Quote, "If the enemy came for Pearl Harbor, then by God they would find a fight waiting for them." End quote. Meanwhile, just north of Puerto Rico, an abnormal storm began to grow. It didn't move, it didn't change with the temperatures or bend unduly to greater air currents. It just wrapped itself like a shroud around the Puerto Rican coast and slowly stretched out for Hispaniola and the Virgin Islands. No one had ever seen anything like it before, and where its shadow fell, Morgana seemed to gather. Theories began to develop as scientists tried to make heads or tails of this strange phenomenon, but no one will likely know until they peer into the eye of the storm. Following that, we go across the Atlantic to the United Kingdom, the fourth contributing member to our united front. For the British, it was a week of public disasters and a week of subtle progress. Admiral French's and Admiral Forbes' long-delayed plan to improve the security of Scapa Flow was begun after War Plan Fortress Orkney was enacted, calling for additional cables and defenses at the main entrances and new block ships for the lesser channels. It was not begun quickly enough to avert the coming disaster, however. Just before the dawn on the 14th of October, with the greater portion of the home fleet at sea, Royal Oak slept contently. At about 3:05 a.m. local time, and wholly without warning, a salvo of torpedoes slammed into her, opening her to the sea and flooding her to a 15-degree list. In the panic and fires of the attack, the bell of the Royal Oak manifested, seemingly willing the water to stop its progress, and furiously engaging her tormentor, who, reports state, an unknown silver-black Morgana of considerable stealth and speed. As her crew struggled to get to their action stations, Royal Oak dueled the strange Morgana, driving her westward in the bay. The patrolling destroyers there were hard put to engage the enemy and avoid Royal Oak's furious fire at the same time. The unknown Morgana thrashed under the assault, and yet might have made good her escape, were it not for the unexpected volley of precise fire from the direction of the Risa Little. The Morgana was caught between the unexpected attack and Royal Oak's incoming fire, and was quickly struck by multiple fatal shells. As the Morgana sank, seemingly dissolving the cold water of the bay, Royal Oak used the last of her strength to get as many of her crew to their boats as possible. Her power at last failing, the waters finally broke through her defenses, and she sank, turning over at about 4:21 a.m. At around the same time, Sedition began broadcasting the death of the Royal Oak at the hands of a German U-boat. 2 days later, at another blow to morale, the German bombers delivered their payloads to the Firth of Forth. Sources say Hitler was certainly delighted at this outcome, but in reality this was a horrifying answer to the defeat of the Kriegsmarine in the North Sea, and one the apparently overstretched Royal Navy seemed ill-equipped to deter in the future. Despite all that occurred, the underlying state of affairs at Scapa Flow, in fact, very much improved by the end of the week. The Morgana had gotten profoundly lucky in her attack, and the weaknesses she'd exploited were immediately filled. But the heroic battle of Royal Oak against her assassin made the hearts and minds of the United Kingdom more determined than ever, and more ready to face an uncertain future. Of final note, and with approval from my friends in the SIS, disclose that a once-secret expedition in the Arctic Circle failed to signal at the agreed-upon time. Whether it was due to mines, weather, Germans, or Morgana was unknown, but it seemed certain that they were lost at sea. After that, we hop across the channel to hear news from France, the fifth contributing member to the war against the Morgana. This week, the Marine Nationale's auxiliary bell captains continued to integrate into a loose but effective structure. This heightened confidence in governmental and army circles that the appearance of bells would not significantly diminish the ability of France to fight the war. A notable example of this collaboration was the expertise that certain bells were able to provide to the newly established PC Bruno in an effort to decrypt Morgana communications. The time and expertise provided by the bells was instrumental in discovering important intelligence about the Morgana mischief, originally broadcasting somewhere near the Gulf de Saint-Tropez, with whatever communications intercepted deemed important enough to go straight to Daladier. Whatever was in said communications must have been quite serious, as shortly after an emergency meeting was called by Daladier, in which the war plan enemy codes passed with an almost unanimous 93% support. As a result, the funding of Morgana decryption efforts tripled before the week was out. The Marine Nationale was instructed to make every effort to listen in on Morgana transmissions, no matter how disturbing some of them might have been, or how dreadful some of the subsequent dreams might be for those ordered to listen. Meanwhile, paranoia chased mischief away from Saint-Tropez, and apparently began patrolling the area to prevent her fellow Morgana's return. Does this perhaps mean the Morgana are competing against one another? Only time will tell. Following that, we turn our attention over to Germany, the sixth contributing nation to the war against the Morgana threat. This week, sources say that members of the Kriegsmarine were startled to hear a series of Morgana broadcasts proclaiming that U-boats had attacked and sunk HMS Royal Oak at Scapa Flow, particularly those senior officers who had convinced Donitz not to go ahead with the plan. It proved to be misinformation, but their false story was so detailed and had so much knowledge of Plan P that it raised fears of Morgana spycraft within the Reich. The bombing run on the Firth of Forth was almost delayed as a result, but the Luftwaffe proceeded as planned on the 16th of October. Although not a great success for Germany, it did remind the United Kingdom that they were not out of reach. Apart from the U-boats, the Kriegsmarine was sealed away from the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Morgana concentrations in the Skagerrak Strait were worse than they had ever been, and the Allies were still intent on maintaining as much of their own blockade as the situation would allow. When German news reported that Britain and the Morgana were working hand in hand against Germany, it wasn't much of an exaggeration in reality. In the midst of all that, ORP Orzel slipped internment in Estonia on the 18th of October, escaping hours before the Soviets arrived off Tallinn. It is said that a bell appeared when she grounded on a sandbar, and she personally heaved the submarine off, daring all the machine gun fire of the harbor guards. In response to the news, new orders came from Berlin enacting the war plan, fishing for an eagle in the hopes of finding and presumably sinking the submarine. The Kriegsmarine promptly began combing the routes out of the Baltic, but did not discover the submarine. This did not prevent a formal closure of the naval war by the OKM, however. 3 Polish submarines were interned in Sweden, and Orzel was recorded as lost at sea, thus ending victoriously the Baltic naval war against the Allies. The League of Nations proposed mounting a formal investigation, giving persuasive rumors that Orzel's bell awoke in Tallinn before the attempted escape. But by the end of the week, Germany still had not agreed to participate. Of final note, a rebuff of the Finnish invitation sent on behalf of Germany to participate in negotiations with the Soviet Union were received poorly in Helsinki. Perhaps the Germans and the Finns aren't as close as they once thought. Lastly, we turn our attention to the Baltic and Black Seas to hear reports from our comrades in the Soviet Union, who are the 7th contributing nation to the defense of our united front. The Morgana disease had been operating unabated in the Black Sea for weeks now, and in her wake an exotic plague bloomed. It originally presented with symptoms similar to yellow fever, but uncommonly severe. But as time went on, radical neurological effects became more and more evident. It was weeks before anyone realized that the mosquitoes transmitting the disease were themselves unnatural, adapting to mild and moderately cold conditions, making them a substantial threat for the region. The Kingdom of Romania was just as interested as the Soviets were in hunting down the cause, seeing this as not just a local threat to stability, but the entirety of the Black Sea, Balkans, and East European area as a whole. Orders then subsequently came from Moscow, enacting the war plan Spread of the Disease, which found 71% support from the Politburo. Captains of the Black Sea Fleet were ordered to clean up the region and target disease formations wherever they were found. Soviet and Romanian doctors and scientists risked their own health prowling the Danube Delta looking for clues and tending to the afflicted in the meantime. Meanwhile, in the Baltic, ORP Orzel's escape from Tallinn was treated with great suspicion. Sources from within the Soviet Union state that this was a breach of Estonian neutrality at best, and outright treachery at worst. In the eyes of the Soviets, wherever she ended up, she was not where she rightfully belonged. It was another sign that the USSR had to assert itself soon before the local neighbors, both the Germans and the Finns, decided that they were too soft for the moment in which they lived. And with that concludes the League of Nations War Report for Week 3 of October. Despite the lingering conflicts between nations, we hope to see the support amongst the nations against the Morgana continue in the future. Remember, united we stand, divided we fall. And as a reminder to all captains and citizens alike that this League of Nations broadcast is intended on keeping you informed about the unified war effort against the Morgana. But there is more you can do to help both on the front and at home. It's important to keep morale high in these trying times, and with Halloween just a few weeks away, now would be the perfect time to spend some of that prestige you've got on a fun new costume for yourself or your favorite belle. Lacking in prestige to partake in the festivities, consider purchasing some war bonds. Not only do you support the ongoing war effort against the Morgana, you will gain fame among your peers, which in turn you can use to buy you, your friends, or your belle something fun to wear for the upcoming seasonal event. Thank you for listening, and may you have smooth seas.